Hi, David Vizard here, and you're about to watch another episode of PowerTech 10. Here, what I'm going to talk about is one of the weak points of a small block Chevy, at least the early original ones, and that is the connecting rod. That would be the failure point before anything else. So let's get with it, and I think I've got some things to show you that will really knock a lot of cost out of your budget build. Here we have a stock small block Chevy rod as used in the later roller block Chevys from about 87 on. These rods are very good, 5.7 inches long, and they are stout. They're made from a pressed powder metallurgy first pioneered by Porsche. They live up to a reputation of being able to take a beating. However, it's still a 5.7 rod and it weighs in at around about 610 grams. If you've got these rods, then you have to ask yourself if it's worthwhile changing them to the better 6-inch rod or not. That's a question of the size of your budget. But if you choose to sell them on the used market, you can probably get $100 for a set like this. Now, I've seen them go for about this price on eBay. Now what we have here is Scat's low buck entry-level connecting rod. It's a 6-inch long one, which is desirable, especially on a lower compression engine and if you're using hyper-eutectic pistons. Why? Slightly more horsepower, because there's less piston side loading and less friction involved, but equally important, and probably more so if you want an engine that sounds nice, is that it cuts down piston slap noise. Now, the other aspect is that it's lighter. Even though it's 0.3 of an inch longer, it's actually lighter than the stock roller block rod that I just showed you. So here we've got a connecting rod which is right on 600 grams as is, and they can be had for as little as about $145 if you're prepared to scan eBay. Another aspect of this low-cost Scat rod is that it comes with a bushed pin end. This is good. A bushed pin end allows pistons to be installed and removed much easier. If you have a press fit pin, such as the stock rod has, this is a press fit, can be converted, but it's nonetheless a press fit, and a conversion would cost bucks. This is something that getting the piston off is difficult without the equipment to do it, and then it may still distort the pistons. So if you have a performance vehicle, a bushed pin is a much better bet. Plus, it distributes the wear over 3 points instead of 2. Now comes a telling question here. Let's say that you want to build a high output motor, but on a tight budget. We'll say that you've got a good 350 block and a good crank. And by the way, the cast Chevy crank, if it's not been burned or anything like that, is a far stouter crank than it's often given credit for. Then you may want to build a motor where the rod situation becomes a pivotal issue. For instance, is a cheap rod like this strong enough to take nitrous? How much horsepower would this rod take? We'll talk about that next. Let's run with this Nitrous 350 idea for a moment and see where it gets us. As it happened, about 9 years ago, I worked with a friend of mine, and we put together a Nitrous 350 motor, which was actually more of a rebuild than anything else. My friend had ported the heads, done a nice job of it, and it was nothing special. It was just well done, good craftsmanship and the right stuff. But they were iron heads, and it was a flat tappet cam motor, nothing special there. A Victor Junior intake, a 750 a Holly double pumper carb on it, and a set of these rods. Now then, that motor was raced for about 2 years. What we didn't know was that the guy we built it for, as soon as he got to the track, he put bigger jets in, the Nitrous, right? So when we came to run this on the dyno, instead of it giving about 125 horsepower increase, as we expected, which would have brought the already 500 plus horsepower up to about 625, the first push on the Nitrous button showed almost 800 horsepower, and then the side of the block came out. Now then, that engine was pretty much useless. Now the interesting thing is that although some of these the rods in the engine, which was this type, were pretty mangled, none of them actually broke. I mean, some of them were bent like pretzels. So this led us to ask our driver how many passes he'd done in the time since we originally built the engine. It turns out that he had done over 200 passes of the quarter-mile drag strip with the Nitrous set so that the total output of the engine was around 800 horsepower. On a cheap rod like this. So you can expect this rod, if it will deal with racing conditions up around the 800 horsepower mark, it is going to deal with anything you can throw at it on the street. And remember, they are available for less than 200 bucks. So this is a rod I can totally recommend. But it doesn't solve all the problems of our enthusiast engine builder. 383s with a stroker crank are very common. Let's talk about that now. It could well be, if you have a little more on the budget than building a straightforward 350, that you might want to contemplate building a much more torquey 383. This is done by using a 350 block with a 30 over bore, a stock oversized bore, and replacing the 3.48 crank with a 3.750 stroke crank. Now, as it happens, this is a very popular move here, and as such, many cranks have been sold, thus bringing the cost down. One of my favorite cranks here is to use the Scat 9000 series crank, which comes in 3 forms: a stock replacement style crank with square counterweights, one with slightly performance radius counterweights, and one that has as much windage work done as a casting will allow. These cranks are very cost effective and are about as tough as a typical stock factory forged crank. I've used a lot in the last 20 years, so I can thoroughly recommend them. But there is a snag. If you're going to use a rod with the through bolts like this, then you will find that with a stock base circle cam, some of the lobes hit the rod just here. Now back when we didn't have much option on rods, I used to grind these off here until they just cleared the cam. And that was okay, but after a while I found that when these motors had started to stack up 40 or 50,000 miles, then on a teardown we would find that some of the bolts were showing signs of fatigue and cracks in them. We never broke a rod, but I'm sure somewhere on the edge of it. So what can we do? Well, it is possible from comp cams to get cams ground with a base circle reduced from 1 inch diameter to 900. And this more or less solves the problem. You're in a position to take about 50 thousandths less off here, right? But it's still not a really satisfactory deal. First, I don't like using reduced base circle cams. They are dynamically not as good as the bigger base circle cams. But we have an option. So let's look at that now. this here is the rod that we've just been looking at. This is the first option on our list. What Scat have done is they've replaced this through bolt here with an ARP cap-headed bolt, which is threaded into this part of the rod. That effectively does away with this head here. So less needs to be taken off here. Now there's about an inch of engagement here, and this leaves this rod in a position where you can cut it to clear a 1-inch base circle cam without significantly reducing the strength. If you're going to build a 500 horse motor, this rod will work and last a lifetime. The downside is it's going to cost you probably $60 or $70 more. So this takes me to our next option. Here once again is the stock pattern of style bolt and big end that we see on the factory rods and the street level stock replacement Scat rods. What we have here is a very effective connecting rod that is stroker clearance. What's happened is they've reshaped this here. They've used a 7/16 bolt to hold this together. All of this here has been reformed, and if we layer one rod over another, which we'll do in a moment, you'll see that this area here will give the camshaft much more clearance. We can use that in a lot of different builds, and with a little bit of modification it can accommodate up to a 4-inch stroke in a small block. So let's lay one over the other and see exactly what we have here. If we lay one of the Scat stroker rods over a stock rod, we can see how much it's cut away here compared with the stock rod behind it. Now to make up for this, it's got these beefing up ribs here, right? So strength wise it actually is significantly stronger than the stock pattern rod. Sure, these are going to cost a little more, but they're worth it. One last thing I wanted to say about this stroker Scat rod before I get on to some conclusions here is about its weight. Just check this out. As you can see, this Scat stroker rod weighs in at a tad under 570 grams. That makes it 35 to 40 lighter than stock. All that's a good aid towards getting a better or closer to an internal balance. So what are the main points that I've tried to put over in this little connecting rod episode? Simple. Rule 1, don't use any more connecting rod than you have to. Right? All that does is make the balancing of your crank harder, plus you're swinging around more weight, causing more windage or windage loss. Secondly, the lighter the connecting rod, the better off you are in terms of crankshaft stresses from reciprocating loads. Third, you don't need to spend a fortune on a good connecting rod. So, granted, there are other manufacturers of connecting rods other than Scat. In fact, there's some extremely good ones out there. I've used rods from Oliver, Crowder, Carrillo, Cosworth, just to name but a few. All manufacture really good rods, but at a price. I've also used some of the cheaper rods from several other manufacturers, and I have to say there's good rods out there, but there's also some not so good ones. So I suggest if you want to be sure of buying a product that works, you at least go along with my recommendations here. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at other examples, right? But check to see if they're okay. Now then, before finishing, I need to say one thing, and that is, this is not a paid for ad. This is based on my experience of over 30 years of building V8 performance engines. Scat did not contribute 1 single cent to this video. Thank you for watching. One last point before I close up this edition of PowerTech 10 on connecting rods is the fact that between myself and my friends, a lot of dollars were shredded to be able to bring you this information. Information that's first-hand, not somebody else's information. It would help if you hit the like button and the subscribe button. We get enough of those people and it helps us offset these costs. Some of these tests we've done are very expensive. For instance, we learned how to build reliable nitrous motors. Reliability for massive street performance. That'll be coming soon, so watch out for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.